Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 6 of Global Conversations. My name is Amanda Coletta.
And I'm Nick D'Agostino. Today on Around the World in 10 Minutes, we examine the politics of asylum in the European Union, followed by recent developments in the East Asian island disputes.
Later in the podcast, we bring you a discussion with Master of Global Affairs student Ashley Lefler on the Canadian Centre for the Responsibility to Protect, followed by an interview with human rights activist Farouk Khaki on the issues of gender equality, sexual orientation, and progressive Islam. And now for our first story. Despite the cooler temperatures and choppier waters, hundreds and sometimes thousands of asylum-seeking migrants have boarded decrepit boats this winter and set sail across the Mediterranean in search of a better life in Europe. By the time they arrive in Europe, they've likely been the victims of mind-bending violence at the hands of their smugglers. And once they step foot on land, they quickly realize that Europe, which has worked to systematically close its borders to them, is anything but the area of freedom, security, and justice they anticipated. And for the many who make it to the shores of Europe alive, there are countless others whose lives end tragically in the Mediterranean. Up until a few years ago, the migrants were primarily from the coast of North Africa, but since the Arab Spring and Syrian crisis, the composition of these migrant flows has changed, and the number of arrivals has increased exponentially. The failure of Europe's current asylum policies was brought into sharp relief last October after almost 500 migrants drowned in two separate shipwrecks off the coast of the Italian island of Lampedusa. Many asylum-seeking migrants consider Mediterranean countries such as Italy, Greece, and Malta, with their unconscionably poor records of integrating migrants, to be transit points. Their true desire is to apply for asylum in countries with well-established welfare states in Northern Europe. But they can't. Even though the Schengen Agreement delineates the concept of free movement of persons within the European bloc, the Dublin II regulation states that asylum seekers are required to make an application for asylum in the country where they first arrive in Italy, and, well, you're stuck in Italy. The application of the Dublin system has led many southern Mediterranean countries to argue that they require assistance from the rest of the European Union. They claim that they are forced to bear the burden of asylum seekers due to a derisory policy. Northern European countries respond by pointing to the numbers. According to Eurostat, in 2013, Germany, France, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and Italy were the European destinations that received the greatest number of asylum requests. This has worked to strain relations between the North and South, with most states in agreement that the system is broken under its current configuration, but few willing to cede sovereignty over migration to Brussels or come to the table to devise a more sophisticated solution. And until that happens, Europe's asylum policies will continue to miss the boat.
And now for our next story. The borders and boundaries that divvy up the planet are highly politicized, and disputes between states can rage on for decades. In Asia, a historical feud between China, Japan, and Korea over small islands is coming to a boil. National pride, historical narratives, and potential wealth all play a part in this complex issue. The Japanese government has recently ordered schools and textbook publishers to take a strong nationalist and patriotic stance when teaching on disputed island territories. Specifically, the new guidelines ensure that instructors refer to the Korean-held islands as being illegally occupied and that no territorial dispute exists with China or Taiwan over Takashima. Predictably, the move has heightened tension in the region. South Korea has quickly demanded the reforms be withdrawn immediately, with Foreign Minister Cho Tae-young stating, "Japan is teaching its growing generation lies by again rattling on with groundless claims about Dokdo." With so much national effort being spent over a territory, you'd think there was a sizable population on the islands. In fact, the permanent population of Dokdo is 3. Of course, they're protected by a contingent of South Korean soldiers. So why so much controversy over such small islands? Well, for one, the waters around both islands provides great fishing grounds. But more importantly, reports suggest that a huge swath of oil reserves exists in the region, providing much more incentive to lay claim to the islands. With states pushing to secure energy resources and historical narratives to galvanize the population, conflict is palpable. Now, as a foreign English teacher in Korea, I tried to stay as neutral as possible on the subject. However, when I first learned of the islands, I asked one of my classes about Japan and Dokdo. 15 angry 12-year-olds yelling at me about Japan was enough to convince me that this conflict won't be going away soon. Next, we bring you an interview by Sam Wollenberg with Master of Global Affairs student Ashley Lefler discussing the Canadian Centre for the Responsibility to Protect.
On the program today, I have Ashley Lefler, who is the Senior Research Manager at the Canadian Centre for the Responsibility to Protect. She oversees a team of MGA students who are looking into the responsibility to protect doctrine, and we're going to speak a bit about that today. So welcome to the podcast, Ashley.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So let's start with the basics of what is the responsibility to protect.
Okay, so the responsibility to protect is a norm to prevent and stop the 4 crimes outlined in the ISIS report and the World Summit document. That's genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and ethnic cleansing. It's not international. It's not law. It's a political commitment to guide preventing these crimes from occurring. R2P is most commonly mistaken to only provide for military intervention, and that's actually not the case. It actually, one of the 3 pillars, so the 3 pillars are state responsibility to protect citizens, the international community's responsibility to assist and encourage, and then the responsibility of the international community to take appropriate diplomatic, humanitarian, and other peaceful measures. Coercive measures are really a last resort. What's really important about this doctrine and this idea, this norm, is that it transformed how we thought about state sovereignty and human security. It brought these elements to the forefront, and it really turned on its head this idea of state sovereignty from just the right to govern over a people, but it changed it to a responsibility, which was really incredible and important. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
You are also looking at humanitarian aid as far as how that ties into the responsibility to protect and a bit of accountability there.
Yes, so this year we launched a humanitarian aid in Syria crisis research project. Basically, this is an MGA team of students who are currently collecting data to see, we're sort of trying to build a link between aid in Syria and countries supplying aid. So what we did is we stopped and we took a look in September at the top 8 contributors at the time. And from there, we are collecting data on their aid contributions.
And these are private organizations?
No, these are governments.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yep, no problem.
So the top 8 government donors at a moment in time. And we are tracking what they're saying they're giving and then what organizations they're going to, because most of the aid right now in Syria is going either directly to the UN or through NGOs. So basically, the Canadian government, for example, will list on their website how much has gone to each organization. And from there, we are tracking those organizations, those NGOs, where they're operating exactly within Syria or on the outskirts of Syria in one of the neighboring countries. We're trying to build this link between funds from a specific country to where it's going in and around Syria. And our report is actually set to be launched at the end of March, so March 29th.
Awesome.
As part of our advocacy campaign.
Awesome. It seems like a very crucial amount of data to be collecting. You need to hold governments accountable in the sense, but also then relate it to what's happening on the ground. So thanks so much, and thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Next, we bring you an interview by Saher Shafiq with Farouk Khaki on the issues of gender and sexual orientation in progressive Islam.
Hello everyone. Today we have with us Farouk Khaki, a Toronto-based immigration lawyer and human rights activist. He has done much work on the area of gender and LGBT equality in Islam. Previously, he also ran for the NDP in the Toronto Centre riding. Farouk, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for asking.
I understand that you founded a group in 1991 called Asylum, which is a support group for gay Muslims. And more recently, you started the El Tawheed Jummah Circle, which is a gender equal and LGBTQ-friendly mosque. So what were the initial reactions to these movements in the community back when you started this activism, and how have people's attitudes changed since then?
So when I started Salam back in 1991, it was shortly after I had moved to Toronto. And it was the first time that I was actually meeting other people who were Muslim and who were also queer identified. So before that, I had sort of intellectually known that I was not the only one, but in terms of sort of social affirmation, that didn't happen until I came here. But what also became very evident to me in the early part is that we were living schizophrenic lives, that sometimes we were not out in our families or in our communities as being queer, and sometimes we were not out as being Muslim in the LGBT community. And so for me, this kind of schizophrenia was problematic for me as well, right? And it was conflicted. I didn't like sort of being one person in one space and a different person in another space. So Salam was at the beginning it was called a lesbian and gay social support group, a social support group for lesbian and gay Muslims. And I specifically picked that name because I didn't want to enter into theology. I didn't feel that I had the capacity to engage on a religious level, but this was a way of bringing people together.
So now that we're 20 years plus in, how has that reaction how has that changed?
Well, I think a lot of things have changed, right? So it's fine to talk about Islam and what Islam is and what it isn't and what it could be and what it can't be. But where was this manifest? And I didn't find very many places where it was manifest. And so the starting of Al Tawheed Jummah Circle as a gender equal, LGBTI affirming space, it's not just welcoming, because everybody is welcome in our space, but you don't have to hide who you are. You don't have to pretend to be somebody else. It affirms you, your relationships, your families, etc., right? And for me, that has been the most transformational space. But what was different was 9/11. And 9/11 really changed, I think, a lot of things for the good and for the bad in terms of the Muslim community in Canada and the global Muslim Ummah. Because I think one of the things that it did is it forced a lot of people out of their Muslim closet. Because whether they were religious or not, no matter whether they practiced or not, all of a sudden, if you were Muhammad, you were Muslim, right? It was an automatic hat that you had to put on regardless of your attachment or practice or belief. So I think that was a very important sort of transformation, because a lot of people started coming out of their Muslim closet saying, not in my name, this is not my Islam, right? And I think that's what's created that space for issues around gender and sexuality within the Muslim community.
Interesting. Well, this conversation could really go on for much longer, but unfortunately we're out of time. So Farouk, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
You have been listening to Global Conversations, produced by students in the Master of Global Affairs program at the Munk School of Global Affairs. The executive producers of Global Conversations are Michelle Park and Nathaniel Dove, and assistant producer Simran Batra. Staff appearing in this episode are Nick D'Agostino, Sam Willenberg, Sahir Shafiq, and myself, Amanda Coletta. A special thank you to guests Ashley Lefler and Farouk Khaki. Thanks for listening.